Welcome to Star Campus. The topic of today's webinar is How do I benefit from internal repetitions? What looks alike is not always the same. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Kerstin Fröse and I work in the training and support team at Star Language Technologies and Solutions. This company belongs to the Star Group, which has its headquarters in Ramsen in Switzerland. Today, I would like to give you an insight into working with internal repetitions in Transit NXT, how you can recognize them, display them in the Transit editor, analyze and translate them, and which aids are at your disposal for this in Star software. Please be aware of the fact that some parts of the webinar might be more relevant for project managers and some parts more relevant for translators. I will point out for each topic for which group it matters more. If there are questions, I will be happy to answer them at the end of this webinar. Now, let's have a look at our agenda. After the introduction, we're going to look at displaying internal repetitions, analyzing internal repetitions. This is more relevant for project managers. Then it's going to be translating internal repetitions, which is more relevant for translators, and reviewing internal repetitions, which is more relevant for translators and or reviewers. Now, let's start. Internal repetitions, what are they? They are segments that appear repeatedly in the text, that have the status not translated after import, and that are identical in text and markup. How are they displayed? First of all, we can use the quick segment filter, the symbol of which is this button here, which I'm going to show you in Transit now. Okay, here you see I have a project. It's from English into German. I have opened all files, and here in the middle you can see the symbol for the quick segment filter, which I'm going to double click. And in this window, quick segment filter, I click on only repetition segments and on apply filter. Now you can see there are 5 segments altogether with 2 different groups of internal repetitions. And how we're going to translate them, we are going to have a look at this later on. Now we're going to look at displaying internal repetitions. Okay, I'm going to switch the filter off and open the user preferences with colors and fonts. Okay, here you can see that you can apply lots of different colors to lots of different elements. And we are now interested in internal repetitions, where we can choose a background color. And here on the black triangle, when you click on that, you can choose your own color. And I want to have a bright orange so that I can see my repetitions straight away. I save this and close it with OK. Now here in the text we can see that the colors haven't changed yet. In order to see the colors on the interface, I need to do something else. I need to go to the tab View, to the group Segments, and switch on the color for the info column for internal repetitions, which I'm doing here. And I go to Segments and again internal repetitions. I click on this, and now you can see in the text that both in this column and in the segment itself, the color of each internal repetition has changed to orange. All right. And now we're going to have a look at analyzing internal repetitions. In Transit NXT, you can see how the internal repetitions of your project are analyzed via project settings, report settings, and we're going to look at this, of course, in Transit, and via statistics. You can select regard internal repetitions, and you can select per project or per file. So Transit regards internal repetitions either for the whole project or for each file separately. And you have to make sure that if you choose per project, that you have to import all project files at once. Now let's have a look at Transit. How does this look in Transit? You either go to the project settings and go to report settings, and here we can see that in this project internal repetitions are regarded per project. And the other place where you can see, where you can get the info about internal repetitions is statistic, language pairs project, and then the Transit Report Manager opens. Here you can see regard internal repetitions is ticked, and they are regarded per project. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. If you count in internal repetitions per project, then the repetitions from more than one language pair can form an internal repetitions group. And if you want to translate them in internal repetitions mode, you have to open all language pairs globally. If you want the repetitions counted per file, only segments from one single language pair can constitute an internal repetitions group, and the same internal repetitions, so the same repeated segments from two or more language pairs, are two or more different groups if they occur at least twice in the language pair. If you then translate in internal repetitions mode, there are no restrictions for you. You don't need to open all language pairs globally. There are different report types in Transit. We have import report, progress report, and translation report. And the internal repetitions are only shown in the import report. So the report options for internal repetitions, at which we're going to have a closer look in a minute, the options count limit and weighting factor are only relevant for this report type, for the import report. If you choose a translation report, then repetitions will be counted as 100% matches. Now, let's go back to Transit again and to the report manager. Here you can see the different report options. We have chosen import report here because we want to have a look at internal repetitions. And I'm going to have segments as unit that are counted for my report. Now I want my report options, internal repetitions, webinar options, and I'm going to update my statistics. So here you can see the internal repetitions found is 3. We saw earlier in the quick segment filter that there are 5 segments altogether that are counted as internal repetitions. And in this import report option, there are 3 repetitions found. So 3 repetitions that are counted as internal repetitions. And you can also see here that it says reduced by limit. This refers to the count limit. Now what does this mean? Count limit 1, this is how this report is currently set. Count limit 1 means that 1 internal repetition, each from the first and the second group, is included in the cost calculation. So the internal repetitions count limit is used to define how the internal repetitions in a group are included in the cost calculations. Here we have a count limit of 1. If you have a count limit of 2, the first 2 repetitions are calculated as normal segments. As of the 3rd repetition, the segment is counted as an internal repetition. An evaluation of the expected 100% matches is already available after the import, because you can see how in this report how many segments are counted as normal segments, as normal to be translated segments, and which segments are counted as repetitions. So we're going to have a look at the count limit. As I said, currently this report is set to count limit 1. And now I open this window, report options, and we're going to have a look at the tab fuzzy repetition, and here you can see the count limit. Now I'm going to put it at 2, save my options, close this window, and update. Okay, and you can see the internal repetitions found are reduced because as the limit is 2, 2 internal repetitions are included in the cost calculations, which means 4 translations are calculated as translations and 1 translation is not calculated, meaning that it appears in the import statistics as an internal repetition. So this is here. If you set the count limit to 3, then all of the internal repetitions of our example here are included in the cost calculation, because 3 is the biggest number of segments that we have seen here that are in our text. Okay, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to put the count limit to 3, save my options, close the window and do an update. So, since all of the segments are now calculated as normal translations, no translations are not calculated, and this means no translation appears in the import statistics as internal repetition. And this is why the number here is 0. Now, you also perhaps saw another thing on this tab. This number here says repetitions only in column view. This number refers to the weighting factor. Now let's return to our PowerPoint. The weighting factor. This can be defined in report options for not calculated internal repetitions. This way, internal repetitions can be calculated with a specific percentage of the price. The default, which we just saw in our options, is 0, which means that real internal repetitions are not calculated. But if you make the weighting factor bigger than 0 for internal repetitions, then they can be counted, and they're only regarded if the option is switched on Show Repetition Column. And this is what we're going to do in Transit. Okay, so I'm going to put this number up a bit. So if I put it to 0.5, I'm going to tell Transit to count internal repetitions for 50% as half a normal segment. I have to save this, and I have to go back to my report manager, and I have to say show repetition column, because otherwise the weighting factor isn't shown, isn't calculated. And I'm going to update my statistics. Okay, internal repetitions are 0 at the moment, and I'm going to put back the count limit to 1, which should give me again 3 internal repetitions in the internal repetitions column, and the weighting factor now is 0.5. Okay, so I save it, I close it, I update it, and I can see the totals that I found again, as we saw earlier, is 3 internal repetitions. And since I have given 50% of the count to an internal repetition, there should be 3 internal repetitions counted with 0.5 with this weighting factor. So now we should have 1.5 internal repetitions counted, because 3 times 1 and 0.5 is 1.5, but in the display 1.5 is rounded up, and this is why we see 2 here instead of 1.5. So this was it for statistics today. So I'm going to close them. And now we're going to look at translating and reviewing internal repetitions. Let's have a look at our slides again. If you translate and review internal repetitions, you have the option to work with the internal repetition mode. The internal repetitions can then be specifically selected and translated independently from the other segments in just one step. There's a precondition for working in this mode, Namely, the files have to be in alphabetical order in Transit. And this is also the default settings for file order. For checking, which we're going to see later on, we recommend a concordance search. And if you want to read more about this, you can do this in our Transit NXT user guide in chapter 6.7, Checking Internal Repetitions. Now, how does this look in Transit? Okay, we are in our project and we want to work in internal repetitions mode. This means first we will need to translate in this mode and then review in this mode. Internal repetitions is a group here on the tab processing, and you can switch it on and off on this button. And as soon as you switch it on, then the symbols won't be grayed out anymore, but will be in color. So I start by clicking on the green arrow, which leads me to the next internal repetition, which of course here is my first one to translate. And this is the segment Many Languages, One Strategy. I'm going to translate this into German. So in German it's viele Sprachen, eine Strategie, but of course the language is just an example here. Now, I'm still in this internal repetitions mode, and I want to give this translation to the whole group. So I say here, I go to the button Translate Group and I click on this button. So Transit has translated the whole group for me. Then Transit automatically proceeds to the first segment of the next internal repetitions group, which here is Professional Translation Tool. I'm going to translate it again. And I'm going to put in a German spelling mistake so that we can correct it later on. Here we see that this term, translation tool, is in the dictionary. So we can use a certain key combination to take over a translation from the dictionary, which is the Alt key, alternate, and T. If I want to have the first translation of my terminology, of my dictionary. And now I have here Professionelles Übersetzungstool with a spelling mistake in German. Let's imagine I don't see this mistake, and I say again, Translate Group. Then I click on this button here, and Transit tells me that the end of the file was reached and that there are no more internal repetitions. Please note that Transit applies the translation to all subsequent segments of the corresponding internal repetitions group. Transit does not translate those segments of the internal repetitions group that come before the current segment. So I click on OK, and I can switch off the mode now. Now let's go to reviewing the internal repetitions. I'm going to jump to the start of the whole project because Transit always only regards the internal repetitions after the cursor, not in front of it. So let's go to review. Okay, and here we see again there's a group that's called internal repetitions, and most of the buttons are grayed out at the moment, so we have to switch it on. When starting the review internal repetitions mode, you can use the drop-down menu here when you click on this this black arrow. And here you can select the status that you want to give the segments once you have reviewed them and marked them off. I will select the first of 3 possible review steps, spell check. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cold. In theory, after I have reviewed the job, 2 other reviewers can review it and apply the next segment status up using this mode. Okay, we want spell check. I have to switch it on. Okay. And I'm going to start with group 1 again. So I click on the green arrow here to get me to group 1. And here I have my first group, viele Sprachen, eine Strategie. I can see, I check my translation here, I see that it's correct, and I click confirm. And the tooltip tells me that I assign the status selected for the mode to the whole group. So I click on this, and Transit automatically jumps to the next group. Now here I see I can't confirm this translation for the whole group because there's a mistake. So I'm going to the place where it needs to be corrected. I correct it and I say change and confirm. And now I accept the translation as it now is, the changed translation. And I assign the segment status selected, which is spell checked. Okay. And again, Transit tells me that the end of the file was reached and that there are no more internal repetitions. Now let's check the status, whether that has worked correctly. Now I'm here, for example, in this segment, which should have the status spell checked, and I go to this line here at the bottom, the status line, and it says spell checked. So this has worked fine. And of course I'm going to save my translation that I've done so far. Instead of using the confirm button, you can also use the keyboard shortcut alternate and insert that you always use for translations. As I said earlier, we recommend running a consistency check via the concordance search. There you have to select several things in the dual concordance search in order to make this work. And this is what we're going to look at now. I'm going to switch off the internal repetitions mode, and we're going to look at user preferences again. And here at dual concordance. Now here we have to select search in working folder and not in the reference material, because we are at the moment only interested in the working folder. And you also check display identical matches once only. Okay, I'm going to save this. And now we're going to check both groups. And for both groups, let's start at the beginning. For both groups, you select the segment in the source language. We're at 16, okay, segment 16. And then you do a right-hand mouse click to open the menu, the the context menu and you choose dual concordance from the context menu. The working folder is searched, and if you only receive one translation for this segment, which is shown in the dual concordance window, then you know that the internal repetitions group is translated consistently. So here we have only one and exactly one translation, and this means no other translation can be found in the text, and the group is translated consistently. I move the window a little bit, and I do the same check for the second group, which is professional translation tool. I'm going to mark it in the source language and say dual concordance, and here we can see the same. We only receive one translation, so the group must be translated consistently. Okay, so I close this. And if you go to the internal repetitions group again, this goes both for review and for processing. If you go to navigate and click on this little symbol here, you will see keyboard shortcuts. You can also work with your keyboard with shortcuts to make work easier and quicker. And so navigate through the internal repetitions faster. Once again, you can also look this up in more detail in our handbook. I'm going to show you the chapter. So you will find more about this in chapter 5.12.5. Keyboard shortcuts for internal repetitions. Right, now I have spoken about all the topics I had prepared for you. Thank you very much for your attention today, and goodbye.